This is not your everyday podcast. Real conversations, real stories. All right, today on Innovators and Litigators, we have someone I consider incredibly brilliant, and not just because she's a friend of mine. I'm talking about Susan Witt. She's the managing partner and powerhouse litigation for me. Whether it's taking on massive insurance companies or navigating complex medical malpractice cases, she's the one you want in your corner. Susan, welcome to Innovators and Litigators.
Thank you, Nick. That's a very generous introduction. I appreciate that.
I mean, every word of it. So Susan and I have known each other for quite a while. We've worked together on several cases. We're currently working on cases together. But I want to kind of let you give an introduction as to who you are and what you do.
Well, my name is Susan Witt, and I am a trial attorney representing individuals who have been injured through the negligence of others. I do primarily a lot of medical work, but other types of injuries as well, all the way from car accidents to premises liability cases. I'm a small boutique firm. I'm not large volume. I don't want to be large volume. I like giving my cases personalized attention. All of my clients have my cell phone number, and they can know that they can reach out and call and text me when necessary. I try to give it a personalized experience. I've been doing this a long time, and I feel very privileged to be able to do what I'm doing and help people and make a difference in their lives. But I started practicing back in 1998,
Wow.
which is, you were probably still in elementary school.
No, not quite. Maybe middle.
But I actually graduated from law school in Texas. I am from Texas. I come from a family of cattle and cotton ranching folk. So it's hard work, and getting your hands dirty was something I was always used to growing up. And I learned a strong work ethic from being from that type of family. But I graduated from law school in Texas and practiced there. I actually did defense work for 10 years. Had clerked for a plaintiff's attorney during law school who had a lot of medical malpractice cases, and I was really drawn to them. I thought I wanted to go to medical school, but I really didn't have. I had more of the interest and less of the aptitude,
Right.
Because I'm not a math and science girl.
Blood and math, yeah.
Yeah. So I really wanted to work for him after law school, and he said no, that he would not hire me because he wanted me to go get defense experience first. And he said, come back to me after 5 years. All good plaintiffs' lawyers, or most good plaintiffs' lawyers, there's always exceptions, and you're one of them.
I was recruited by defense, but I turned it down.
Many experienced plaintiffs' lawyers gain their experience by being defense lawyers. And so I went to work for a small medical malpractice boutique firm in Texas, and then moved to Georgia in 2001 and worked for a defense firm here, continuing to do medical defense, also premises liability defense. And I ended up getting not 5 years, but 10 years of their experience on the defense side. And then I decided I wanted to switch and felt that I was having some constraints to my practice as a defense lawyer and wanted the freedom to be able to pick my clients, which you can't do when you're a defense lawyer. The insurance company just hands you a file, and whether you agree with their position or not, that's the case that you have to defend. That's your job. I decided that I really wanted to be able to choose who my clients were, and I've chosen them very carefully over the years, and that makes a big difference in having a successful practice, because you're only as good as your client. And so I've been blessed to have my own practice, and I enjoy co-counseling with great attorneys such as you. I don't have a partner because I've just wanted to be able to have control over my practice and keep it small, and then I get to choose who I work with. Any case may need a different flavor depending on our venue or the type of case involved. So I've enjoyed the freedom that being a solo practitioner, but bringing in other counsel to help on cases as well.
And this is what I want to dig into a lot. One of the themes of this podcast, and the reason I started it, is there's this theory that there's only one way of success. You have to do a specific way. There's certain steps. And you and I could not have more different practices,
right.
But they complement each other very well, in my opinion. And so I'll kind of reel back into all the things you went through, because obviously I think that's the important part of your story. What is it about defense work that you think is so important for crafting someone's experience and skill as a lawyer?
Well, it's much harder to be a plaintiff's attorney than a defense attorney. But one of the things that has made it easier for me to be a plaintiff's attorney is, as a defense attorney, there's a lot of reporting involved when you're dealing with insurance companies. You are doing quarterly reporting, trial reports, trial budgets. You're constantly having to report to the adjuster or the TPA, the third party administrator, whoever may be managing those claims. And so those reports, when I was doing them, were the bane of my existence because they took forever and they were tedious. But it helped me learn what was important to the person who was evaluating the file, the person who was going to be putting money in reserves on that file. Because it's not the defense lawyers that are making those decisions. They have to write reports to their clients. They can make recommendations, but they're not the decision makers when it comes to the money and whether or not they're going to pay on a claim or how much they're going to put in reserves. And so it was invaluable to me to have that experience because I got to learn what's important to the people who are evaluating the cases and who are making the decision about what to do with them.
I feel like that would frustrate me, as constantly having to. You're representing people that are deciding are not really the people you're representing. Does that ever get to you, or you're making these recommendations, or the client agrees, you agree, but maybe there's this third party that won't let you make a decision?
There is a tension involved in that representation because you almost have dual representation. You have the insured, who you have your, first and foremost, that's who your obligation is to, but then you have an insurance company who is behind that insured. And sometimes what the insured wants and what the insurance company wants could be two different things, or they may see things differently. So it was frustrating at times where I had clients who wanted cases to go away and not have to go through the litigation, that they just wanted to get the case resolved. And insurance company, they're making business decisions and deciding that that's not what they want to do. Conversely, when we have medical cases, a lot of people don't realize that doctors, just like lawyers, if we ever get sued, we have insurance. We should have insurance.
Should.
It's recommended. An insurance company cannot resolve a case on the doctor's behalf or a lawyer's behalf unless we provide consent. And there were times often that I thought a case should be resolved. I thought that there was high risk involved in proceeding with the case. But unless a doctor consents, then the insurance company has a continued duty to defend them. Recommendations can be made all day long, but at the end of the day, nothing can be done without the consent of the professional. That's different in car accident cases and other types of negligence liability claims. It's really unique to professionals who have to give consent in most circumstances. I've seen very few policies where consent is not required.
Right. Why do you think you stayed? Initially, you had interest in working for the plaintiff's firm. Then they told you to get 5 years. You stayed 10. Why do you think you stayed for so long?
Believe it or not, I am a risk-adverse person, which is ironic that I ended up in one of the riskiest areas of the practice of law. During those 10 years, I was having children. I have 3 daughters. And there was some stability in terms of working for a defense firm, that I had a steady paycheck, I had benefits, I had huge resources. I never made a copy. I never had to print anything. I had a paralegal, I had a secretary, I had a nurse paralegal. When I switched sides, I didn't even know how to use the copy machine. I was completely inept because all these things were taken care of when I was a defense lawyer. But I think there was some comfort to it because I didn't have to worry about a lot of things. It allowed me the ability to have some stability while I was having children. But at the end of the day, I was bringing in work to affirm that as a woman, I was not feeling like I was getting the recognition of bringing in work and coming through the ranks of what still felt like a very male-dominated culture at that time. I think things have shifted since then. At that time, I just realized I did not want to have a glass ceiling put above me about what I could earn or how far I could climb, and that I was ready to take that risk and take more control over my life and my schedule, and felt that after 10 years I had acquired enough experience that I could switch to the other side. I was not prepared for how much more difficult it is to be a plaintiff's lawyer than a defense lawyer.
No.
I think a lot of defense lawyers take that for granted. And many who have made the leap to the other side of the V, it's a little shocking at first.
It's fun to actually speak to people that we've gone against on the defense and seen them transition over and hearing that move. But something that I always try to touch on when it comes to women of your level of success, especially in a traditionally male-dominated profession, what advice would you give, or any stories you could give to women who are trying to follow that path, who are experience things? We love to pretend that we're all the same and all, it's all the same difficulty accomplishing certain things, but I think it's unique to women who are expected to bear children and to step out and take care of children.
Well,
and it falls soundly on you guys.
It is. It is very difficult. I find this is a profession that still presents a lot of challenges for women who want to have careers and also family. In the medical profession, you have the ability to pull back on your hours and find a way to keep your hand in the game without it being full-time.
Right.
That is much more difficult as a trial lawyer. I can't speak to other areas of practice because I think there may be ways that it does work for women in other areas of practice, but trial law is, quite frankly, not something you can do part-time.
Yeah. And I know in big law, billable hours and things like that are really the path to the highest tiers of success, and you can't do that when you're, with your children all the time. So.
No, you can't. So I think that when you look at current law school classes, I think it's pretty 50-50 in terms of women. Women may have a higher percentage, but when you look at who's practicing law 25 years out, it is very disproportionate in terms of male to female ratio. I think that there's a lot of women who end up stepping out and do not make it to 25 years, which I've crossed that threshold. Thank you. But it hasn't been easy, and you have to have a support system in order to make that work. But I do think that we need to find better ways to support women who can stay in the game longer. This work is not cut out for everyone. You've got to have really thick skin, and you have to be tenacious, and you have to be, willing to get beat up a little bit and stand back up and continue to fight the fight.
What specifically do you think you did differently that maybe where others would have stumbled or things like that when dealing with? Because a lot of people decide to make a decision nowadays. I know my discussions with a lot of professional women, they kind of decide, I'm going to pick one or the other. So what do you think you did differently that maybe others?
Well, I think life circumstances help dictate our choices. Right. And I became a single mom, and I have 3 daughters, and there was no choice to stay at home because I had to support my children. And this profession and being on the plaintiff side has been such a blessing because there are not constraints on what I could earn. Like if I were at a defense firm, there's certain caps on what I can earn. And as having my own practice and being on this side, money goes up and down quite a bit.
Yes.
And you have to be disciplined about saving and structuring and accepting that money is going to go up and down, and being able to be financially responsible and plan ahead, particularly when you've got 3 children who are relying upon you to make school happen. And I've got some children who have had learning differences and have required some specialized education. And that's not inexpensive.
Yeah.
So I feel that life has driven me to stay in this field the way that I have, because there wasn't another option. Even if there had been another option, though, I wouldn't have changed things. I think I've modeled to my children that find a career. It doesn't have to be law, but find a career where you can always take care of yourself.
Right.
You can be financially independent. You do not have to stay in bad relationships or bad circumstances because you are relying upon somebody else.
Right.
Always be independent and have the path of self-determination.
Something that I enjoy about speaking to people like you and I and other people we've had on here is that anytime I ask for a ton of specifics, a lot of times the answer is that's how it happened. It was going to happen. There was no path to failure. And I get that feeling from you because I think a lot of people would disagree. I think a lot of people would have been like, "Oh no, there's been a lot of trips, and a lot of falls and failures," but it sounds like you were just like, "There's no other way. Like this was going to happen. We're going."
Well, I mean, I think we all face circumstances in life where we come to crossroads and the rug can get pulled out from underneath you, and things can feel very overwhelming. But for me and making the choices about my practice and what I was going to do and what direction I was going to take, it wasn't clear cut. And there were certainly days that were scary and hard, a lot of anxiety and feeling overwhelmed. But I felt like if I just put my children at the center of my compass, my decision-making compass, and I kept them in mind when I had to make choices, I couldn't go wrong if I did that.
Right.
And that's been kind of my mantra throughout the years, is just the symbol of the compass has always meant a lot to me. And everybody's compass is going to look different.
Right.
But if you figure out what yours is and what keeps you making the right decisions, you can't go wrong.
Find your values. You talked heavily about having a support system and being able to assist you in that. But then you were also a single mother, which a lot of people would feel that's less of a security system and things like that. So how did you kind of foster that ability to succeed while also being a single mother? I was raised by a single mother, and I've seen them do it. So,
well, I think the only thing that has helped me achieve the things that I've been able to achieve both personally and professionally is community. I'm a big believer in building community. I don't have any family that lives in Atlanta, let alone Georgia. I've got my biological family lives in other states, but it's the community that you build and the people that you intentionally choose to put in your life and in your inner circles, and they become your family. And it's important to have a personal community and to show your children how to build community, because I think studies show people live so much longer, not because of money, but because of community. And we all have a sense of purpose and giving to each other and being able to give back. And building a community, I think, is critically important to success, personally and professionally. And I have a personal community and I have a professional community, and they overlap in many places. But I think one of the things that has also helped me professionally is to be humble and realize there was a lot I had to learn when I changed over from being a defense attorney to a plaintiff's attorney, and finding good mentors and, listening more than talking, and learning from people and learning from other people's failures and successes, and being humble and knowing and accepting that, you're not the smartest person in the room and you're probably never going to be, and that's okay. But surrounding yourself by people and just try to be more of a sponge and listen and learn from others is what certainly has helped me in terms of my practice, but also with having the support system for my children.
One of my favorite sayings is, how do you appear to be so intelligent? It says, I shut up when I don't know. That's the best part, is speaking when you know, and that should be pretty narrow. And that's something that I love about the type of law that we do, is a lot of times when you work with the people that are more general practitioners or kind of dabble in a lot of different types of law, they're more willing to speak on certain different things. But experts in our field are very scared to talk about anything outside of their specialty, and I think that makes you appear at least far more sharp.
Well, I think a lot of people hear that you're a lawyer and they start asking you questions about things, and I have to politely stop them and
Right.
say, listen, the law is like this giant globe. I know a lot about this little tiny portion
Right.
down here. Otherwise, I'm, in many respects, just as knowledgeable as any layperson when it comes to other aspects of the law. But I think I have wanted to take a more specialized approach to my practice versus more generalized, and so that I've been able to focus on one area. But, the ability to do what we do is always impacted when we go through these legislative cycles, and it's very concerning what this next legislative cycle may look like because of this big push of tort reform and the propaganda behind it.
Before we go into the details, if you could explain to the audience what tort reform is, I'm sure some people don't really know what that means. And in fact, they intentionally make it vague as to what that means. So.
Well, tort reform is the concept of making it more difficult to have access to the courthouse and putting caps on the ability for injured persons to get recovery. And that can mostly come in the form of compensatory damages. Medical bills, things we can attach numbers to, they've had a hard time with being able to narrow the scope of recovery for that. There's some nuances that come with that.
Differs by state.
It differs by state. But where the real battleground has been, and the tort reformers have been successful, is compensatory damages. The pain, the suffering, the loss of household services, the quality of life that has been changed because of the negligence of somebody else. Severe caps have been put on the ability to recover for that in many states.
Right. Nuclear verdicts.
So fortunately in Georgia, we haven't had those caps yet. There's been attempts for that to happen, yearly efforts for that to happen, and I'm a little concerned about the momentum behind this next legislative cycle. But when tort reform occurred in Texas, it was rather sweeping, and particularly for the ability to bring medical malpractice claims in Texas became almost impossible. And what happened was that the work dried up.
Yeah.
So if there's not people bringing a lawsuit, then there's no need to have people defending a lawsuit. And so most of us that were doing defense work, I had already left Texas by that time, but over 50% of my law school class does not practice law anymore.
Wow. And you believe it's almost
directly related? At that time, it was directly related to tort reform.
And I want to get our audience excited about this or educated on it, because I think it's incredibly important. So I personally have been affected by that. Arguable medical malpractice, obviously, it wasn't proven in a courtroom because it was capped. So my brother had a hospital-acquired infection that spread to his brain, eventually killed him. And it happened in Colorado, and they had very severe caps. And so really it didn't make it viable. There's kind of two ways that you can kind of protect doctors that a lot of people don't know about. Georgia, most states lean where they basically make it difficult to even bring a case. They have affidavit requirements, things like that basically make it more prohibitive to bring a case. You can't just sue a doctor easily. So that's one way that I think is important. I think all of us agree that it shouldn't be super easy to sue your doctor if something bad happens.
There's absolutely gatekeeping procedures that we have in Georgia that are appropriate, and they keep a lot of cases from ever being filed.
And that's why I hate this narrative that caps are necessary. These things have to, preventing people, when a jury of your peers hears how horrific what happened to you and they believe that's what you deserve, they then should have that invalidated when there's already these protections.
There's already these protections in place. Number one, the affidavit requirement, but just the sheer expense of bringing these cases and the amount of time that it takes to get a case from start to finish, the general public doesn't really know or understand what that looks like.
Intentionally.
Intentionally. That is not part of this discussion that's happening, with respect to the politicians lobbying to have legislative change. But any given case of mine, from a medical malpractice standpoint, and we'll narrow the discussion to that, it could take 3, 4, 5 years to get from start to finish.
For the audience, and I think this is going to combat this narrative that all these sweeping changes are necessary. What percentage, vaguely, of cases that come into your office do you actually accept?
I
medical malpractice.
I reject probably 9.8 out of 10 cases.
Right.
And it's not because people don't have a case. Oftentimes, something bad has happened. There is a legitimate problem. The reason why I'm not able to take the cases is because what happened isn't bad enough.
Right.
The cost of bringing a case and hiring the experts and all the money that we have to do to put into working up a case. And if you're not doing that, then the case isn't being worked up properly.
Right.
But the amount of money that it takes to work up a case, and then, of course, our fees, because we don't get paid until the end, and I end up advancing all these costs to my client. They're basically getting an interest-free loan because I self-fund my own cases. But on any given medical malpractice case, I may have $50,000 or $60,000 in costs before we ever get to trial.
Or more.
Or more.
You and I are familiar with more.
Yes, it can be much more than that. That might be an average figure, but we can have exceedingly high costs that we are fronting, and we are bearing all the risk. Because if we don't have a successful outcome, then the client doesn't owe us any money.
Right.
So we are bearing all the risk. We have to be very selective about what we take to make sure that the damages are high enough to yield a recovery that makes sense.
And to make clear, the reporting differs, but it's either third or fourth most common cause of death in the United States is at least contributed by medical error. I mean, that's been reported for decades.
Well, and
this is not an occasional problem that's happening, that we're just nitpicking and trying to get millions off these poor hospitals.
Well, we're going to be seeing more and more error, I think, with, and I'm certainly not an expert in this, but I know enough that it's concerning as AI is being implemented. For example, in many labs, we're not having humans read lab values. They're being done completely by computers. And there can be false and positive results. You can get a false negative or a false positive. But if you're removing the human element that is reviewing some of these things, we are seeing that there have been more problems. And I think that more are to come as we are removing humans and using more AI and relying, I think, to a fault on technology. But back to tort reform and medical malpractice, I don't think it's needed in Georgia whatsoever. And I understand the narrative that Governor Kemp is trying to say that Georgia will be more business friendly if we have tort reform. I think that our public needs to be concerned that the efforts that are being put forward are going to deny us the ability to have access to the courthouse and to a jury, which is what our constitutional fathers intentionally put in, that when we have disagreements, when we have disputes in our society, we have ways to civilly resolve those disputes. And that is where we rely on 12 people from the community to come forward and how we have a civil process to handle things. And that is being taken away. And I don't think that the general public really understands or appreciate what that means until they need to have access to the courthouse because something has happened to them or happened to a family member. And then all of a sudden they can't go through that courthouse because of all of the obstacles that have been put in place, or because you can only end up filing lawsuit if it's a catastrophic circumstance because of the cost that has been built in by the defense side and through legislation that will keep all the smaller cases out.
And that can cause more problems because that lets these providers understand that they can act with impunity unless they have a horrific result, which is very scary. We already know that medical error is incredibly serious. That's not coming from a biased point. That's just a statistical fact. Then we already have these guardrails that exist already. No one wants rampant suit against every time a doctor looks the wrong way. We all agree with that. So we already have all these specific requirements that make it difficult to sue doctors, which we all agree with. So we already have a serious problem that exists. We already have additional protections that protect hospitals and doctors. So we go through all these guardrails, and you're turning down 98% of cases that come through, even though that many times these are problems. So we already have this built-in guardrail. Now, once we've gone through all these different specific hurdles, and we've got hundreds of thousands potentially of expenses, now the legislature wants to go, jury heard it, jury says they deserve blank amount of money, but forget that. Let's make it something worthless that they was not even able to help this person recover from something. I mean, where should the burden lie when somebody has suffered such a serious injury? I don't think it should be with the patient that endured that.
No, and what's incredibly frustrating that I also don't think the general public is aware of is if we're having these continued discussions about tort reform, doctors should be required to carry insurance in Georgia,
right.
And they're not. There is no requirement through the state, through the Composite Medical Board, for a doctor to have to maintain at least a minimum threshold of insurance in order to have a license. Other states do require a minimum threshold.
I support that for lawyers.
100%.
Yeah. So this isn't coming from a bias. I think
no,
lawyers
I think
required as well.
I think all professionals who are being given the trust of people through, a medical or legal situation that could dramatically impact their life. Everybody, we're humans. We make mistakes. We have to have insurance to drive a car.
Right.
But I think we should also have to have insurance to practice medicine or practice law. And the fact that there are many doctors out there that are bare by choice, because they think, well, if I get sued and I don't have any insurance, that will be a deterrent to make people go away. And quite frankly, that can be effective.
Yeah.
But if we are going to continue to narrow the pathway to the courthouse, then I don't understand why it's not included in the discussion that if we're going to do that, then you must require insurance to be carried by the professionals who are taking the trust of the public into their hands.
Right. So what suggestions would you give to people listening to prevent these kind of results that Texas has endured?
Well, if we're narrowing it to a medical discussion, I've given many talks on what you should do to learn more about your doctor, ask questions before you ever agree to have any procedure done, particularly if it's elective. And know how to research your doctor to make sure that they're board certified, to make sure that where the procedures are being performed are equipped to be able to handle anything that could involve patient safety, that there are protocols in place, that they have the proper equipment and the proper staffing that are qualified and that they are credentialed. Georgia has and I've spoken quite a bit about my problem with Georgia's allowing office-based surgery. We see this in a lot of cosmetic cases, which I handle a lot of cosmetic cases, and we see these chop shops, is what I call them.
I'd love for you to give examples, because I know you're well known for that type of
Well,
case.
I am, and I have been on a crusade to try to get these places shut down, because Georgia does not have, while we don't require insurance, you can have an office-based practice that is not regulated, and there's no limitation on the scope of practice for a doctor in Georgia. As long as you have an MD behind your name, you can do anything. And what we are seeing a lot of, especially through the pandemic and when we had all the pandemic checks coming out, we saw the rise of these cosmetic surgery centers. where we have doctors who are not qualified to be doing what they're doing. They just have great advertising, and maybe they've got some celebrities behind them, and they're doing things on Instagram and TikTok. And what I call is predatory marketing towards certain groups within the communities that may be drawn to having particular cosmetic procedures done. I'll use the BBL just as an example because I've handled a lot of those cases where a lot of this predatory marketing is targeted toward African American women and women of color to achieve this certain look that celebrities are putting out there as the way that a body should look, which is not natural at all. But a lot of people want that look, and I understand that.
And it can be expensive.
But it can be expensive. Except then you have these places that are offering these types of procedures at a discount, and it seems very attractive. And a lot of the pictures that you're seeing are not real; they've been photoshopped, or they're not the work of those particular physicians. But we don't have the truth in advertising to protect consumers from knowing whether or not that's the work that was actually performed by that doctor. But a lot of these procedures are being done in essentially offices that are not medical offices. And they do not have the sterility and the protocols, and the people that are working there don't even have to be licensed. You can have medical assistants, which aren't licensed in Georgia, and there may be a doctor there, but maybe it's a doctor who was a dermatologist or an ENT who has now decided he can make a lot more money in cosmetic surgery. But there's no specialized training that's required for them. They could watch a couple of videos on YouTube or maybe go observe a colleague performing the surgery, and then they can be deemed qualified to hang a shingle and open up shop and start providing these services to individuals, and then something bad happens, and then there's no recourse.
And to be clear, this is not a hypothetical for you. You've dealt with these specific types of
I have a number of cases pending right now.
Because I think
there's a particular group that we have cases pending against. That's they have an office in DeKalb called Goals. There's been a lot of publicity about them. I handled a lot of the Dr. Boutte cases that a lot of people remember her as the dancing doctor. I mean, these things are real. People are suffering from infection, death, pulmonary embolisms, burns, just permanent scarring and disfigurement. Women who are saving up their money to go in to have a mommy makeover or to, just feel better about themselves. And then they walk out extremely damaged. Physically, emotionally, they've been traumatized, and then they go to lawyers like me, and a lot of lawyers don't take these cases because they're expensive and the damages aren't enough.
Right.
But I have taken these cases. I take them more in groups when I see patterns of behavior of these types of chop shops. That's what they are, where I have groups of cases when there have been these patterns. But it is extremely concerning to me that these can continue.
Yeah.
Our laws allow for this. There's nothing that has prevented this, and has not been part of the discussion at the Capitol when they're having these roundtables about tort reform. I think we need to start with medical reform.
Absolutely.
If we're going to have tort reform, then okay, we can have that discussion. But how are we going to reform the medical industry? Where are the holes that need to be filled, and where are the protective measures that need to be put in place that would be so easy to, but we're just not doing it.
Any other tips you'd give to somebody who's worried about this?
Well, I mean, there's a whole checklist you can go down in terms of checking out your physician. I mean, most of the times, if your physician has hospital privileges or your procedures being performed at a hospital or an accredited surgery center, you can be pretty well assured that those doctors are qualified.
Right.
Now, we see a lot of bad things still happen in the hospital systems, but at least we know they've been through a credentialing committee who has vetted them. You are required to have insurance in order to have privileges at the hospital, so that is a safeguard in place. I would not recommend anybody have any procedures done at a outpatient office that you can't verify the credentials. You can't verify that the people in the facility have gone through a credentialing committee and that they have been vetted and that the facility has been inspected to make sure that it complies with, really it comes down to patient safety.
Right. I love that. One thing I wanted to touch on before we go, and one of the things that we talked about your transition to plaintiff's work, but one thing that you told me once, and I don't remember, correct me if I'm paraphrasing it correctly, but I think you said that you'd never in your defense work ever actually gave authority that you were provided when settling cases. Was that something that you leaned away from?
You're giving away my old secrets. Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of
it's impressive.
It's embarrassing to say now, but a lot of our cases do get resolved through the mediation process. Again, my focus has been on medical cases, and a small percentage of those cases actually go to trial. The ones that do, are usually in favor of the physician at the end of the day, because juries tend to, when in doubt, will tip towards the physician.
Absolutely.
That we see that a lot. So our cases do go through the mediation process, which is a process that historically has been effective. But as a defense attorney, I would walk into mediation and my adjuster might be with me, might not. The adjuster is the person, of course, who works for the insurance company, who I ultimately report to, and it's the adjuster that decides how much money they're willing to put on a case to get it resolved. Mm-hmm. And insurance companies don't care about people. They don't care about their injuries.
Don't forget it.
Don't ever forget that. They'd push their own grandmother down the stairs to save a nickel.
I've had insurance companies when the liability carrier has accepted liability, their own insurance said, no, my client's at fault. I mean, it's disgusting.
Yeah, it's insurance companies have so much more power than I think what our society realizes, but they do not care about you.
Why do you think you transitioned to plaintiff's work? What specifically made you go, no, let's be crazy. I'm not good with math, but let me fund all these cases and take all this risk.
At that time in my life, I felt like I was worth more, that I could do more, that my talents were being pushed down. Certainly my abilities were being constrained. I was representing too many people because I had to, not because I wanted to, and I didn't necessarily believe in some of what I was having to sell because I wasn't able to pick my clients.
Right.
And I didn't feel good about some of the decisions that were being made. And I wanted to have the control over the type of work that I was going to do and who I was going to do it for.
Another thing that ties back into tort reform that I actually find comedic is a lot of times the insurance companies will not listen to their defense counsel. Their defense counsel is telling them this is a problem. This case is dangerous if we try this case. And even as I'm walking into the courtroom, they're saying, I told him to pay you. I told him to pay you. We'll see what happens. And then the jury comes back, which we both decided at a number that was well in excess of what the insurance company said to pay. And now they go run to the legislature and say, look at this verdict. It's so high. Yet everyone told them that it was going to be high, and they didn't listen.
Well, and that's the thing that is so frustrating, is because I think the real problem with the system lies more in the defense of these cases. Right. And there's been so many opportunities before you ever get to the courthouse. In most circumstances, there have been multiple opportunities along the way to get a case resolved at a reasonable number. And it is usually an insurance company that's digging in their heels that prevents that from happening. And then we go to the courthouse and we get these huge verdicts. Then they want to scream that, things are out of control. We need tort reform. No, we don't need tort reform. We need you to have been reasonable 2 years ago, right, when we were trying to be reasonable with you. A great example is this case that just occurred, I think, last week in DeKalb. It was a $50 million verdict over a case that had been tried 2 years prior. And there had been a $10 million verdict on that same case. And then the defense took it up, Court of Appeals. They came back down. New trial was granted. And so they tried the case again. And this time the verdict wasn't 10 million, it was 50 million.
Oops.
That whole process was not driven by the plaintiff's attorney. That was driven by a stubborn insurance company who didn't want to accept what 12 people in that community were saying that those injuries were worth. And the doctor in that case had consented, had told the insurance company, you have my authority to get this settled, to make this go away, to compensate this woman
And for almost
who was
certainly
injured.
below that 10 number.
Well below.
Right.
No doctor's
So it's not
insured
even
for
the
10 million.
Right.
And even though the doctor is giving permission to the insurance company to resolve that case, insurance company didn't listen. And now they've got a $50 million verdict on their hands, not to mention the prejudgment interest and attorney's fees and the other things that will come with that. But that's not something that should be taken down to the gold dome and flashed around saying this is why we need tort reform because of crazy verdicts like this. That verdict never should have happened because the insurance company should have made a good business decision that was fair and reasonable years before that verdict ever came down.
So as we kind of move towards the end of this, and I want to make sure you and I have very different philosophies when it comes to the way we run firms, and I want people to understand you can be successful in a lot of different ways. So kind of explain, you've been very successful by every measure. You've been doing this for a long time, and yet you've stayed consistently around the same size and things like that. So kind of explain your philosophy when it comes to being boutique and not bringing on partners and things like that.
Well, I have enjoyed staying small. Circling back to the beginning when I told you I was risk adverse, I have so much respect for you. I remember when I met you, it was at a dinner party one night years ago.
I remember it vividly.
And you and I were sitting next to each other and we started chatting, and you were just this young gun out there who had hung his shingle, and you were a young 30-something and had barely been in the water very long, and you were looking for somebody to collaborate with on medical because you hadn't learned medical. You didn't go to the defense side and do that type of work. And you wanted to work with people who'd had that experience because you were going to be getting some of these cases in, and you wanted to make sure that they were in the responsible and right and experienced hands. And so it's really fun to see your practice have grown, and the number of offices you have, and the number of people that you employ, and the mouths you feed, and all the clients you have that you do such great work for. I have great admiration for your bravery and the risk that you're willing to take on and in the growth that you've done. But you're doing great work, and it's so much fun to
appreciate that.
See your billboards and hear your ads on the radio and know that, I knew you way back when you were just this young kid out of law school. And you've been very successful, and you will continue to be successful.
I enjoy it, and I think that's what's important.
And you're having fun.
Yeah.
And you're doing great things and educating people in the community through programs like this.
Absolutely.
I've chosen to take a different path. And it was the right one for me because I was able to, I don't want to have a huge overhead. I enjoy having the control over what my overhead looks like. Overhead including payroll and all the other expenses that come with, running a business.
Absolutely.
And I never wanted to get into a partnership because I wanted to be able to have the freedom to pick and choose who I was going to work on cases with. I've also unfortunately seen some of my friends who have entered into partnerships that haven't worked out. There have been a lot of business divorces and drama, and people feeling like they can have to choose sides and business divorces and among our community, and I just didn't want to be part of that. I didn't want to run that risk. I like my friends. I want to keep them as my friends.
It's true.
And so it's much easier and more enjoyable for me to co-counsel with people, and that's an effective way to run your practice as well.
One of the best advice I got when I was about to found the firm, because I was desperate to try to find a partner because I didn't know how to do this. I had never run a firm and all the different things. And somebody gave me advice. They said, who do you trust with your life other than your wife? And I said, nobody. I said, no, why would you put your whole life in their hands? I was like, wow. And that's why I did it solo as well. One thing I like about working with you, and that's why I think we make such a good team, is that I understand the importance of specialty. And one thing that drives me crazy, like you were talking about, people think that if you're an MD, you can just do whatever. The same goes for attorneys. I'm not going to go handle a divorce case. I may be a very good personal injury attorney, but that specialty is super important. And I like being able to come to you and say, look, this is super specialized. We're going to focus on this. And a lot of attorneys that I run into, especially the size of my firm, make that mistake of not going, hey, bringing someone in specializing can actually add not only helping the client in the long term, but actually can help you in the end. So what advice would you give to people that maybe you're working in these more generalized, busy firms and working with specialists like you?
Well, I think that you have to be responsible with the work that you take on, and you have a duty to represent your client, and it's okay if you need to bring somebody else in. There's nothing wrong with that. You're always going to learn something by bringing in another attorney who may be more experienced in a particular area or have been practicing longer. That you should be open to that, and certainly not try to take on more than you should be. I think that that's a recipe for not having a successful firm. I think what has brought you success is that you do co-counsel. You partner up with a lot of people, or if you get it yourself in a case comes in that's interesting, but you want to bring in the specialist, you
Right.
have no problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do what we do correctly, then first and foremost, the client gets the compensation that they deserve.
Yep.
And we as attorneys will get compensated fairly if we've done our job correctly. And it's okay to have a pie divided up.
Yeah, and that's something that I try to advise clients on as well, is that when you're picking your attorney, you want to pick someone who not only is experienced and is well reviewed and things like that, but also they understand the business of law. I mean, so many times I've seen people that don't know how to plan, that don't know how to prepare, and the insurance companies know this as well. You and I have talked about how you and I are disciplined and well funded. That conversation of, well, we'll just bleed them out. We'll just drag this out for 3 years, and then Susan will run out of money, and she'll just take whatever. Some attorneys make that mistake. It's not uncommon.
No, you want to be in a position to tell the insurance company, you can't outspend me.
Right.
I will pace you. If that's the game we're going to play here, I'll play your game. I'm prepared to play that game.
And I don't think people, when looking for a lawyer, know to ask that question. How do you fund your cases? Are you prepared to go 4 years on this? Are you prepared to be appealed and then try the case again?
Yes. No, these cases can take on their own lifespan. And I don't think a lot of clients understand the funding that goes behind our work. There are certainly attorneys, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I think clients need to ask and be better informed on how cases are going to be funded. I don't use outside funding companies.
Nor do
Again, I'm not saying that that's a negative thing. It's just I've put myself in a position where I don't have to do that. And I don't add on interest. Maybe people would tell me as a business person that's not good business, because I am ultimately giving my clients a loan when I am advancing all the cost of the case.
Sometimes for years.
And I'm theoretically losing money on that. But that doesn't feel like the right way to operate for me. People are only coming
I don't want to be a banker, right?
No, I don't want to be a banker. And people are coming to me because something really bad has happened. And if I do my job correctly, I'm going to be just fine. I'm going to be able to feed and educate my children, which is what matters most. I don't need to make extra money off of that. But I do think it's really important when clients are interviewing attorneys, and you should interview attorneys. In fact, I tell people all the time, go get a second opinion. I encourage you to. I'm not afraid for you to go get a second opinion. I may not be the right fit for you. Or, I do approach things a little bit more conservatively than others, and that's okay.
And also be prepared for them to oversell you, because that's something I run into a lot. I'm saying, I'm going to tell you the truth. Someone's going to go out there and say, I'll get you $2 million. I try never to do that. So be careful of those attorneys as well.
Well, and I have a lot of clients who will ask me perhaps in an initial interview, so what do you think my case is worth? What do you think I'm going to get? And I tell them, I can't tell you that.
Nothing in front of me.
Well, the value of your case is ultimately what 12 people in fill-in-the-blank county are going to think about your case. I cannot give you a value. I can tell you historically what outcomes I've had, but it frustrates me when I see some of these TV advertising and things where lawyers are telling clients right out of the gate what their case is worth. There are way too many variables to be able to give an honest evaluation of what a case is worth. And I think it is intellectually dishonest for lawyers to put numbers out there prematurely to try to reel the case in.
What are some common mistakes you see from maybe other attorneys that your clients have gone to or things like that? Because I think it's really super important to be very picky when dealing with a medical malpractice attorney. So if there are any pitfalls you've seen that you've kind of saved your clients from, that you would give advice? Because I know I've seen concerning things, certain promises.
Well, I think where clients have come to me because they have disengaged representation with other lawyers, I really don't like taking cases that other attorneys have handled. Number one, I'm in such a small community of medical malpractice lawyers. I don't like picking up somebody else's work because I'm a little bit of a control freak and I like to do things my way. But when people have come to me, it's been primarily because somebody who didn't know what they were doing, somebody who was dabbling in medical malpractice, was taking on a case that they shouldn't have been taking on, that it was irresponsible.
Very common.
That is probably the most common thing I see. And in situations like that, and I think you and I started out this way, is when you were calling me on cases that were coming in the door that you didn't have the experience, it was, we had conversations about, well, do you want me just to take the case and, as we can do in our industry, is give you
Absolutely.
a referral fee, or do you want to work the case together?
Right.
And every single time I was always impressed by you because you said, no, I want to work the case together. We're going to be in this 50-50 on the expenses and the work because you wanted to learn.
Well, I think it's important not only as just developing as a professional, but also as, I have 11 associates, well, we have 10 associates, 11 total attorneys, and it's hard to go into a pre-trial hearing or whatever, tactics, or whether we're arguing cases and saying, well, this is what should be done. I was like, when was the last time you were in a courtroom, Nick? When was the last time you took a deposition, Nick? I think it's really important that no matter what size we get to, you're actually have your ear to the ground and actually doing some of the work. And although I could easily step back and be like, well, I'm just the money guy, or I'm just the hiring guy, I think it's important to refine your skills.
Well, you see a lot of billboard lawyers, and I don't want to put a negative light on that,
Sure.
but you have billboards.
Absolutely.
But I also know you're in there working your files.
Right.
There are a number of billboard lawyers out there that haven't touched a file in years. Mm-hmm. They're just there to sell the firm.
Right.
But they're not the ones actually doing the work.
Right.
And a lot of the people that are doing the work in those types of firms are very young lawyers, very green. There's a high turnover of not just lawyers, but the staff in general. And so there's not going to be anybody that has a particular intimate knowledge about your case because of the turnover. So I think that it is very appropriate to advertise and let people know about your firm and the good work that you're doing over here. But I have tremendous respect for you because when I see your face on a billboard or I hear your voice on a radio ad, I also know we just answered discovery questions together. We just had a strategy session about what's going to happen next. You are in the trenches as well as being the face of your business.
As E-type people who have pushed through a lot of difficulties, and you're a bit closer to the end of your career than I am, what do you see as success?
At this point in my age and my career, what's successful to me is having the freedom of choice, having the freedom to not take on a case because I think it's going to take up too much time from the things that I want to be placing my time in now. I have lived more days than I will live in the future, given my age. So with scarcity brings value. And my days are more valuable to me now because there's less of them. So I like being able to not take a case, push it down to a younger lawyer who needs the experience, who's capable of doing the work. And having the freedom of choice for me is what defines success for me personally.
And I love that. That's a great answer. I appreciate you so much for being on, Susan.
Well, I appreciate your friendship and always enjoy the opportunity to work with you.
And I would say that please remember that you guys don't have to choose. Susan was able to do it all. She was able to raise children. She was able to succeed no matter what she was doing. And I think it's a huge testament to what you do. So, as I say to my audience at the end, always remember, everyone, when you put in the work every day, it adds up to greatness. Thank you again for joining us, Susan.